Hello and welcome to the Joe Ligato Show. I'm your host, Dr. Joe Ligato, and today we're going to be continuing our review of this article from Sinification on why Chinese democracy is better than Western democracy. And so, just as a recap of what we went over in the prior video, we're talking about how performative the Western democracy is. And we're talking about how the West tends to be ruled by the extremely wealthy, the 1%. And we talked about how the Chinese differentiate three separate portions of something. And you have the outward appearance, you have the substance, and then you also have the function. And they came up with these ideas based off of Greek philosophy. So you see them mentioning Aristotle here. So we got through the first question about what is democracy. And I think so far, the Chinese have come up with a very persuasive case for their brand of democracy. And we're going to see here, I scroll to the second question, who does democracy belong to? That's really going to be the focus of this video. We might get a little bit further as well, but the real substance of a democracy, the real use, well, I should make a distinction between substance and function here, but the real purpose of a democracy is it's supposed to satisfy the people. They're supposed to think that the government is doing a good job, it's representing them properly, it's going to lead to a better life in the future. And we can pretty unequivocally say that the West is not doing that right now. It has extremely low approval ratings. If you ask people if they're going to be better off in the future, or their kids are going to be better off in the future, 5 years down the line, 10 years down the line, 50 years down the line, they nearly unanimously disapprove of the government and nearly unanimously do not think they'll be better off in the future. And so we have to ask ourselves, if 90% of Chinese people think their government's doing a good job and that their country is heading in the right direction, is that not a better form of democracy because it's representative of what the people want? And I would definitely say it is. But let's take a look at what this article says in regards to who does democracy belong to. Is it democracy for the majority or for the minority? And there's some interesting things here where the West is technically supposed to codify, solidify, reinforce minority rights. It's supposed to help represent them because they don't want to have mob rule where 51% bullies 49% of the country. However, what we could see is that really it is the 1%, the extremely wealthy, that do control the country. And there are studies that actually show this as well. I actually did a video talking about how policies do not change based off of the majority of the average people wanting a policy to be changed. It changes because of the West wanting the policy, or the extremely rich wanting the policy to be changed. So who does it belong to? Since Athens, the Western view of democracy has been that democracy does not belong to the majority. According to estimates, Athenian citizens, i.e. those who could vote, were probably only about 1/10 of the total population. Women, foreigners, and slaves were not considered citizens. In modern times, the push for universal suffrage in the West has been a long process. Although most countries today have achieved universal suffrage, this does not mean that democracy belongs to the majority. The people are essentially nothing more than voters. As Giovanni Sartori argues, from the perspective of modern Western democracy, the people are just specific individuals who form a majority either according to the principle of an absolute majority or according to the principle of a limited majority. At the same time, one of the manifestations of Western democracy's deterioration is declining voter turnout. Okay, so this is another one where countries like Australia require people to go out and vote, whereas in America, you're not required to vote, and increasingly people are opting out of voting. I think I voted maybe once. I think it was a local election when I was like 18. I never voted. I don't believe in the system. And voter turnout is a good indicator of, do your people believe in the legitimacy of the system? And if voter turnout is extremely low, then they don't believe in the system. And I would say that that is a less democratic system than a system with high voter turnout. I think most people would agree with that assessment. And so, what right does the West have to dictate or to lecture to other countries about what is and what is not a democracy when more and more people are opting out of voting, are opting out of the supposedly democratic system of the West? If you have only a few people voting because the majority don't think that their votes matter, then I don't really think you have a democracy, or you don't have a really good functioning democracy there. And you should certainly not be dictating or lecturing to others about democracy if that is the state of affairs. If your country has a vibrant democracy where people willingly turn out to vote, and it's increasing instead of decreasing over time, then yeah, maybe you might have some degree of legitimacy in terms of lecturing others in terms of what a democracy is. But otherwise, given the current state of the West, absolutely should not be lecturing others on the state of democracy and what a democracy is. So at the same time, one of the manifestations of Western democracy's deterioration is declining voter turnout. Voter participation has been declining in presidential, parliamentary, and other types of elections. Statistics show that in 77 countries where a majority system was being used in the 1990s, voter turnout was only 60.4%. According to the simple majority rule principle, a candidate can therefore be elected with just over, just over 30% of the vote. Okay, so if 60% of people are voting and it's majority rule, then you only need 30% of the population, so less than 1/3, in order to be voted into office and dictate to the rest of the country. So that's not even majority rule of the entire country, that's majority rule of less than 1/3 of the country. And then you have to figure how many of those people are persuaded by things like ads and marketing and just lies that politicians are allowed to tell you. And then you get to the point where you realize that there are actually very few people who have a large degree of influence over elections. An example I like to give here is, people don't remember this, but I believe it was it during, I think it was during the Biden Trump election that Bloomberg, it was either that or the Hillary Trump election, but Bloomberg came in with billions of dollars and just threw billions of dollars at the wall to see what sticks, and managed to get something like 10 to 15% of the Democratic voters to think that he was the best candidate, even though he came into the race very late, and he didn't really have much going for him aside from being rich. And you have to wonder if money has that degree of influence where you could just come out of nowhere and spend $1 billion to get 10 to 15% of the electorate to think you're the best candidate, then maybe there's something wrong with our system. Maybe money should be out of politics. Maybe it should be something that every candidate gets a certain amount of money to spend. They can only spend it in certain ways, et cetera, et cetera. But even though Bloomberg did not get the nomination for the Democratic Party, he was still extremely persuasive in that it took him a week to get 10 to 15% of the vote, and he didn't really have any positions, as far as I remember, that would be persuasive. He just had a lot of money in order to market, in order to make ads. And so that's very concerning for the state of democracy in the West. But here we see that 30% of the vote leading to controlling the country means that being elected does not equate to actually representing the will of the majority. So more importantly, although the people have the right to universal suffrage, voters are not familiar with the politicians themselves, but only with their personas as packaged by the media. So this is a concerning element too, is that politicians could just lie. It's one thing, and it's kind of understandable, and it's hard to make a distinction here about when someone's lying and when someone's inexperienced. But it's one thing to make a promise and then get into the job and realize that, well, I had really wrong ideas about how things work, and so the things that I promised I can't actually do. And that's fine. But then I think the majority of people, particularly people who are getting reelected, they just flat out lie. And so then they get into office and it's like, well, it's your fault as the voters for believing my lies. And it's like, is that actually a democracy? Is that how things are supposed to work in America or in the West in general? I don't think so. I don't think that's a good example of democracy. And I don't think that countries that are like that should be lecturing other countries about what is and what is not a democracy. Furthermore, voters have very little systematic understanding of specialist public policies as they are more concerned with their own short-term interests. And that's kind of the thing, and I've talked about this with a number of my friends, but we would love to just be able to focus on our personal lives, our work, our family lives, our hobbies, things like that. And so things like politics, we would actually like the government to function properly so we don't have to spend much time on it. But right now, given how dysfunctional the government is in the West, we have to spend a lot of time thinking about various policies because we know the government does not have our best interests at heart. They frequently have shown examples of direct experimentation on people with like things like the Tuskegee experiments. We know that they are willing to foment violent attacks on other Americans in order to entrap people. We know that they're willing to sell in order to encourage drug trade within America, things like fentanyl crossing our borders. We know that the cocaine epidemic of the 1900s, things like that, they were all fomented by our government. These are problems that we know about. We have documentation on it. It's very publicly available to us, and so we have to spend a lot of time, a lot of brain power, figuring out government policies, figuring out how to fix it. And so I think a lot of people would rather not do that. They would rather just focus on their own lives. And so what they're saying here is just have a government that works so that people don't have to think about government. They don't have to spend a lot of time on it. And so remember what I've said in prior videos as well. The government is supposed to create a functioning ecosystem for organizations and for people to thrive. The organizations of people, aside from government as an organization, should not really be spending much time distracting the people. The people should be able to go about their lives, doing their thing, helping to progress civilization, and they shouldn't have to focus on government. The fact that we have to focus this much on government means it's not working correctly. And that's what I tell my libertarian friends as well, is you want small government because you've never seen an example of a functioning government. The Chinese, with their centuries of experience creating an efficient bureaucratic administrative system, they know how to create a functioning government, and they're doing a very good job of it because their people are happy. That's the kind of outcome you're looking for to see if the government is functional. Are people legitimately happy? Are they able to go about their lives without having to think much about the government? And in China, they are. In America, obviously not. Okay, voters have very little systematic understanding of specialist public policies. Yeah, we talked about that. Since the general public has little say in public policy, the groups benefiting most from it remain a minority. That is why, oh, and this is another thing, it's almost an arms race to figure out policies. So like the people who have a lot of money or a lot of time to specialize in politics, you can get a lot of advantages by doing so. You can persuade people, you can influence policy by doing so. And so because of that, because there are a wealthy elite trying to take over the political system in America, and I think they've been essentially completely successful at this point, they are able to they're able to spend a lot of money getting lawyers, getting various lobbyists, et cetera, in order to enact certain policies that are extremely beneficial to them. And so they've completely co-opted the administrative system for our nation's ecosystem. And so that's a huge, huge problem. That's why Joseph Stiglitz stated that America today is no longer owned by the people, governed by the people, and for the benefit of the people. It is owned, he says, by the 1%, governed by the 1%, and for the benefit of the 1%. Yeah, that's another thing where it's like, if you have such a unwieldy, impossible to understand tax law, that you need specialized people working around the clock to understand it and figure out loopholes, then that benefits the 1%. If you have a very simplified tax law where it's just like a flat tax or a progressive tax or something like that, then it's very easy to understand it. And so you don't get extra benefits by being in the 1%, where you could just have people working around the clock for you to figure out loopholes. And so we could see that just at face value, the complexity of the system actually helps the extremely wealthy. And it should not be the case. That should absolutely not be the case if we want people to be satisfied with their government. But we see that satisfaction is not an outcome that the West actually cares about, because if they did, they would not be doing any of the things that they're currently doing. Like, the West is a terrible system. People are fleeing it in mass quantities. The people who are staying wish they weren't staying. They're very dissatisfied. They don't think there's a good future. It's just a really horrible, horrible system. Homelessness is extremely high. Drug overdose deaths are extremely high. People are distracting themselves with entertainment, with overeating. I mean, it's just not a good system. Like, the outcomes you would look for answering the question, is Western democracy a good system? All the outcomes you see are the complete opposite of what you would expect from a good system. So, whole process, people's democracy, here we see is a democracy that belongs to all the people. At the same time, the word people contains several important meanings. Okay, so let's see what the Chinese say here. So first, the concept of the people points to the individual. When we talk about the development of people's livelihoods, solving people's urgent needs and worries, and guaranteeing people's right to vote, we're referring to the people in the sense of individuals. Okay, so really understandable. It's just a matter of, you have to satisfy the needs of the people. Anything that is not relevant to their day-to-day lives and their function within a civilization state, you just take care of that so they don't have to think about it. They don't have to be distracted by it. There's enough distractions in modern society. They're inundated with things. You have to take some things off their plate so they can focus on the things that they specialize in. Okay, so second, the concept of the people points to the vast majority of people. When we talk about this concept, we're always referring to this vast majority, and we always have to be on the side of this majority. As the concept of the people has evolved, this category has come to include almost everyone. In legal interpretations, only counter-revolutionaries and criminal offenders have been excluded from this category. Okay, so the people includes everyone except for criminals and people who are against the current system. Okay, so let's see. Third, the concept of the people points to the people as a whole. Western-style democracy does not recognize the people in a holistic sense. Okay, so I'd be interested to see what they mean by that. However, it's only when we recognize the existence of people as a whole that we can ensure their overall long-term and fundamental interests. Okay. All right, so let's look at this part. So high-speed rails is one. Ooh, okay, so if you've been watching this channel for any length of time, you know how big I am on things like high-speed rails, because it's something that doesn't have an immediate profit, and therefore it's not done in the West because oligarchs that control the West don't make any money from it. But it's something that does help the people and helps the nation as a whole to have a good functioning train system. So let's see what they say here. High-speed rails is one such example. China and the United States had the dream of high-speed rail at about the same time. In 2011, President Obama ambitiously proposed that its coverage should reach 80% of the population. Today, the U.S. only has a few hundred kilometers of high-speed rail, while China has built 42,000 kilometers. So there's a couple of orders of magnitude difference in terms of the amount of high-speed rails. It's not like a small difference between the United States and China. China has orders of magnitudes more high-speed rails than the United States. Okay, so if China were like the United States and had to deal with the fragmented interests of different political parties, different states, different businesses, different interest groups, and different individuals, thereby disregarding the interests of the people as a whole, it'd be very difficult to be effective in the development of public infrastructure projects that have highly positive externalities and thus reflect the interests of all. Okay, so completely true. I mean, this is just an objective fact, I would say. If you look at the current system and look at how things have panned out for the West versus China, I mean, it's obvious that they're willing to do things that don't have immediate benefits to the organization doing them, which is the government building rails, but they're willing to do them because it has benefits for the nation as a whole. And so we see that the United States and other Western countries aren't willing to do that. But let's see if there's any other examples of countries more similar to China that are democratic and capitalistic, in a Western sense of democratic and capitalistic. Well, let's take an example that is probably the most comparable example to China because it's similar geographical locations, similar population size. India. How's India doing in terms of high-speed rail? It's doing terrible. I mean, it has less than the United States in terms of high-speed rail. And so you have to wonder, if the Chinese system is so bad according to the West, then why are they able to do things that are of benefit to the people overall that the West is just completely functionally incapable of? Now, don't get me wrong, there are certain maybe benefits to the Western system of having a fragmented groups, such as like different nations or different states, regions within the country that have their own laws that might make things like railways difficult to implement. You could, in a functioning system, a functioning fragmented system, you could have multiple different experiments going on about what is the correct policy, and then you implement the policy nationwide. That's not how the American system works. And so we could see pretty unequivocally that the Chinese system works better. Even if there is a completely ideal state for the Western system that might have some of its own benefits, we see that the West just isn't there right now, and the Eastern system, the Chinese system, is able to do those things that would be of benefit of the Western system that the Western system might be able to specialize in, but is not currently, such as the different experiments running concurrently to see what the best policies actually are in a live test trial. And China does that better. So, okay, fourth. Let's see here. Fourth, the concept of the people points to the middle and lower classes. This is related to the Communist Party of China's primary purpose, whose core members are the working and peasant classes. As such, the CPC's policies are tilted towards taking care of the lower middle classes. We have just accomplished an impressive feat in the history of human poverty reduction by lifting nearly 100 million people, rural people, out of poverty within a decade, thereby achieving an overall eradication of poverty among our rural population. Our next step is to continue to promote unremittingly common prosperity. So they're serious about this. Whenever they say they're going to implement something, they actually implement it. And you can see that here, where I think it's something like 75% of the poverty reduction that's occurred over the past decade has been in China. So they're the majority of the world's poverty reduction. That tells you, I mean, all of our videos are to show you that the Chinese system is undoubtedly better than the Western system. I mean, no matter what quantitative metrics you're looking at, whether it's the amount of high-speed rails, whether it's the amount of poverty reduction, whether it's the amount of happiness within the country, whatever you're looking at, whatever metric you're looking at, it seems like the Chinese life expectancy, China's doing better in life expectancy. Whatever you're looking at, the Chinese system just seems to be doing better. I can't think of an example where the American system is actually doing better. I mean, even in terms of military expenditures, it seems like Western equipment just isn't as good. I mean, we can't compare Western equipment to Chinese equipment because we haven't seen Chinese equipment in action because they're not warmongers like America is. But when you're comparing American equipment to Russian equipment, it seems like Russian equipment is doing better. And we can probably say that Russian and Chinese equipment are going to be roughly equivalent. They're sharing a lot of knowledge, a lot of technical know-how with each other. And so if America is not doing well against Russia and Ukraine, America is certainly not going to do well against China. So I just don't know any metrics where we would say that unequivocally America is doing better than China, where I can name a ton of references off the top of my head where China is unequivocally doing better than America. Okay, so we're not going to get into a third question in this video. We are already 20 some minutes into the video. So very exciting stuff. If you want to figure out how some of these Chinese philosophers, Chinese thinkers think about choosing competent leaders, how do they do that? Then please stay tuned and watch the next video in this series. I think it's going to be pretty different from the West, because we see that if China is functioning right now, it's highly efficient, it's developing, people are happy, people are optimistic about the future, then they must have a good system for choosing competent leaders. Whereas in the West, we have, and I was just thinking about this yesterday actually, where in the West, we have our current president, his son has charges against him, legal charges against him, which implicate the current president of the United States, and the former president of the United States has charges against him as well. And it's just like, we have such a terrible system, a terrible, terrible system where both presidents are fomenting a trade war, hostility. Current president and prior president are fomenting hostility, a trade war with China. Current president really wants to fight Russia. Prior president really wanted to fight China. I mean, it's just endless war, endless tension, endless hostility, and they're so incompetent. And they're apparently so corrupt because they have all these charges put against them. Now, obviously, we have to wait to see how things pan out, but I don't even have enough faith in the American judicial system to say that whatever the outcome is actually the correct outcome, because the American judicial system has been completely co-opted by people like George Soros. And so it's just corrupt, inefficient, just a terrible system, terrible system overall across the entire Western world right now. And just as a reminder, when I'm recording this video, we just got done finding out that Russia is now the fifth largest economy. I believe it's based on purchasing power parity via GDP, et cetera, something like that. But they're the fifth largest in the world right now, the current largest in Europe in terms of their economy. They just beat out Germany because Germany's on the decline, and so is the United Kingdom on the decline. And so Russia is outcompeting the entire West right now, reaching this major milestone. The West is losing across every front. It's just wild. The times we're living in right now, if you're following along with all the videos that we've been making, everything we've been going over, just absolutely wild. Exciting, interesting, I think even hopeful. But it is wild just how badly the United States is doing, how they're just losing across every front. So thanks for sticking with me, and definitely come back for the next video on choosing competent leaders. Please like this video and by giving it a thumbs up, and subscribe to our channel for more content. We're constantly growing. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, critiques, please put them in the comment box. I do read them. I am trying to get caught up on responding to them, but I've been very, very, very busy. So thanks for sticking with me, and I hope you have a good rest of your day. Bye.